He's not here, unless he's out there. I'm not sure if he's here or not, but I appreciate him filling in for me last week. I'm sure he did an excellent job. He always does. Um, we got the opportunity to visit at the Blue Ridge Church in Georgia last week, and it was really good. The preacher he taught the Bible class like we're in now, and they were in the process of selecting elders. They had an excellent lesson on eldership and what the qualities of those men should be and those kind of things. And then after that, I thought he had a really neat lesson. His lesson was about automobiles, and it was about how sometimes we become like, if y'all ever seen, the pictures of like Jay Leno's collection of automobiles, it's this huge building, and it's full of all these antique and wonderful cars and all this stuff. But all those cars are just sort of sitting there. And his point was that we got to be careful not to become like those cars when we come into the church, where we're just sitting here and we're not doing what we were designed to do. His point was all those cars were designed to be driven, and they're just sitting there and they're not being driven, even though as fine as they are. And then he made the analogy of a Christian that just sits there and is not doing the things that they were designed to do. I thought that was a really good analogy and a comparison to open your eyes to, am I just sitting there like those collectible cars? Am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? And so I really enjoyed this lesson. I thought it was really good. And then one other thing from the trip, because I just, if y'all been around me any at all, I really love nature and love being outdoors and those kind of things. And we saw several large waterfalls, bigger than I ever expected to see in Georgia. They were huge. And as we were sitting at the base of one of those, it's a 158-foot waterfall. And we're sitting at the base of that, watching all that water come off of the top of the hill. I couldn't help but think, well, where's all that water come from? And guess what? There was a sign over there. So I went and read the sign. And it was like a 2,400-acre watershed that this little stream got all its water from. Now that's a lot of land, but on the global scale, that's a small spot, isn't it? And it just made me think about, as I'm standing there looking at all that water, I thought about, where's all this water going to? Now, I don't know where we're at, if that water made its way into the Tennessee River watershed or if it went south. I don't know which way it went, all right? But the key point is that this water comes off of that mountain every day. Millions of gallons of water coming out of the ground. And it's a source of life for people for miles and miles all around there. And I couldn't help but think about how wonderful God's creation is and how special of a planet we live on, that all this stuff works like it does. And it just keeps happening. All right? It's just amazing to me. That's just rainfall coming out of that mountain. Where's it all stored up at? I mean, does that not boggle y'all's mind sometimes to sit and think about that? Where does all that come from? I know it's from the rain, but I mean, it's just seeping out of the ground. It just made me think about how great God's creation is. And so, next time you're out looking at stuff, just sort of sit back and soak it up and think about what God's put in place for us. And the evidence of God is all around us, isn't it? We just got to open our eyes and look at it. It's anywhere you want to see it, all around us. All right, now we'll get to the lesson. Just had to share that with you. Today we're going to consider a town called Emmaus. Emmaus, Emmaus. It was a village, and it's located about 6 miles from Jerusalem. And you're not going to find it on any of your maps, all right? I'm going to tell you where to find it on the map I gave you, about where to find it. I did some more looking. I kept digging, trying to figure out, where is this town at, or where was this village? Where was it? And I found out that one of the emperors later, after Jesus' time, Emperor Titus, renamed it Coloni, Kolonieh. And on your map that you look at, if you look at the word Jerusalem, to the left of it, you'll see a palm frond, like indicating where they put down the palm leaves when Jesus came in Jerusalem. But at about the end of where that leaf is about where this town would have been located, just west of Jerusalem a little bit, because there is an archaeological dig of this town or this village that once existed. It doesn't exist anymore, other than ruins are there. But they have found where this was. So it's just west of Jerusalem a little bit. And I just thought that was interesting. It's not a town that people would have known a lot about, other than the fact that it's mentioned in the verses that we're going to talk about today. It probably would have never been known had it not been mentioned in these verses. So, to set the stage for what we're about to read, we're going to be in Luke most of the time today. You remember Jesus was buried in the tomb provided by Joseph of Arimathea, right? A new tomb. He was buried there. And right before this section that we're about to read, the ladies, Mary Magdalene, Joanna, and Mary, the mother of James, had just been to the tomb and found that Jesus had arisen. And we know in that situation, Jesus appears to Mary Magdalene in that situation. First person that sees him is her. But the section that we're about to read here is just following that. So Mary Magdalene and the other ladies, what did they do? When Mary saw Jesus, Mary Magdalene, what did they do? They ran back into town, didn't they? And they told the apostles that they had seen Christ. And what was their reaction? They didn't believe them, okay? They didn't believe that they had saw that. They thought, well, maybe y'all just saw something. Y'all imagined that or something. They didn't really believe it, all right? So that sort of sets the stage. They've gone back and told this. Information is starting to get around. And then we come to this passage in Luke 24, verses 13 through 35. So that's going to be the text. We'll read through that. So join me at Luke 24, 13 through 35. He says, "Now, behold, two of them were traveling the same day to a village called Emmaus, which was 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they talked together all of these things which had happened. So it was, while they conversed and reasoned, that Jesus himself drew near and went with them. But their eyes were restrained, so that they did not know him. And he said to them, What kind of conversation is this that you have with one another as you walk and are sad? Then one whose name was Cleophas answered and said to him, Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? And have you not known the things which happened there in these days? And he said to them, What things? So they said to him, The things concerning Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet mighty in deed and word and before God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Instead, besides all this, today is the 3rd day since these things happened. Yes, and certain women of our company who arrived at the tomb early astonished us, when they did not find his body, and they came saying that they had also seen a vision of the angel who said he was alive. And certain of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it, just as the women had said, but him they did not see. And then he said to them, O foolish ones, and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Ought not the ought not the Christ to have suffered these things and to enter into his glory? And beginning at Moses and all the prophets, he expounded to them in all the scriptures the things concerning himself. Then they drew near to the village where they were going, and he indicated that he would have gone further, but they constrained him, saying, Abide with us, for it is toward evening, the day is far spent. And he went in to stay with them. Now it came to pass, as he sat at the table with them, that he took bread, blessed it, and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they knew him, and he vanished from their sight. And they said to one another, Did not our heart burn with us while he talked with us on the road, and while he opened the scriptures to us? So they rose up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found the 11 and those who were with them gathered, saying, The Lord is risen indeed, and has appeared to Simon. And they told about the things that had happened on the road, and how he was known to them in the breaking of bread. So this happened on the way to this village, and then they arrived there, and they go to eat, and, this whole story sort of comes together here on the road to Emmaus. So we'll break it down. The first thing is, we notice that these are not apostles. These are followers or disciples of Christ. These men had been following him. They had heard Jesus. They knew who Jesus was. And we got the name of one of them, and the other person is unnamed. We never learned who this other person was. There are some people that speculate about who it was, but really we don't know. So these are two gentlemen that have been following Christ. They had been in Jerusalem for the Passover. They had saw all this stuff happen. And the weekend's sort of winding down, and they're headed back to Emmaus. And what are they doing? They're walking down the road, and they're just recounting in their mind all this stuff that has transpired. And they're trying to make sense of it. They don't exactly understand yet. I put down, as they're walking, what happens? Jesus just sort of draws near to them, and he starts listening to their conversation. And it's clear, and it says there, that their eyes were restrained. They didn't recognize who he was. So they're walking and talking about the scriptures with Jesus and don't even know it. I think that's sort of humorous in a sense. So they're trying to figure all this out, and he's listening to what they're saying. He's gaining an understanding of what they think about the whole situation. How are they reading what they know from the scriptures? And then they ask him, they said, Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem? What do they mean by that? Are you the only person that didn't know about this? In other words, the whole town knows what's going on. And why are you asking? Because you must not have been there or something, because everybody knows. So that's given us this idea that it wasn't just a few people that knew about the crucifixion. Everybody in town knew about what was happening. And apparently, the word from Mary Magdalene and the ladies had spread too. I put down, it's amazing how fast information spreads when something's going on like this, isn't it? And this was a big thing, If something like that happened here today, I think it would spread around Springfield pretty quick. Joe was at the funeral home, but he just got up out of the casket and started walking. We would hear about that pretty quick, wouldn't we? All right? So that's what's going on here. And they're still trying to make sense of it all. So Jesus responds to them, or they ask him basically, where you been? Have you not heard about what happened? And he says, what things are you talking about? And I'm paraphrasing, of course. All right? Why do you think you ask them that? I think he really wanted to hear their response. He sort of set them up. He wanted to hear what they thought, because he wanted to learn from what their perception of everything was. So, and then they proceed to tell him everything that's happened, all the stuff that's going on. And remember, they're taking a 6 or 7 mile walk. They got plenty of time to talk. It's not like we're just walking across the street. They got a long hike to take, and they got plenty of time to talk about the things that they're talking about along this way. And of course, we don't have everything that we know they talked about, but I'm sure it was quite a bit. They seemed to be skeptical about him rising from the dead, because what did they say in the passage? They said, it's day what? It's day 3. So there was the significance about him being risen on the 3rd day. Now, I did read in one of the commentaries, they were talking about how Jesus had told them that this right before he was crucified, that he would rise again, and maybe the counting was from that day. The end point is what? We're not sure if this has happened yet or not. We think it's supposed to happen, but we're not sure. We're not sure if that's what he meant by that. I guess my question would be, if you were living in that time, and I always try to put myself in the time that we're reading about, what would your reaction have been? Do you think you'd have been skeptical?
Probably not know the difference, being honest about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Being honest, I think we would really scratch our head, wouldn't we? And we got to understand that, again, hindsight's 20/20, isn't it? We have the scriptures. We know how the story ends. These guys didn't know how the story ends. And regardless of how much scripture and prophecy they had, they were struggling with what that looked like. All right? I think we do the same kind of thing today. Let me give you some examples from today that would be the same kind of doubt that they had here, or at least I think. Are we doing the same thing when we doubt Jesus' ability to forgive us? I'm sure all of us have had sins in our life where we just think, man, that was awful. And I just don't know how God can forgive me. It's the same kind of doubt, isn't it, that these guys had about him being risen from the dead. It's the same thing. Or if we question the ability of God to answer our prayers, it's the same kind of doubt, isn't it? So I think we're not any different than these people would have been at this time. It was just hard for them to understand what was going on around them. So what did Jesus think about their response to the things that they had heard? Just remember, what did they think about Jesus? What did they say when they were talking to Jesus about him? They said he was going to be here to redeem us and to what? They thought he was coming to free them from Roman rule, didn't they? They wasn't seeing that happening. The story wasn't ending like they were visioning it ending, was it? I think that's what their big conversation was about. What is happening? We thought this is what was going to happen, but it don't seem to be what's going on. All right? They thought the son of David would rule from his throne in Jerusalem. That's not what Jesus has got planned, is it? So they had taken all the prophecies over the years and created this vision of what was going to happen, and it was not the right vision. I think, again, we have to be careful, right? That's human nature to do that, isn't it? And sometimes we do the same thing ourselves. We create a vision of what's going to happen, and it's not what God wants to happen or what's going to happen. It comes out differently than what we thought. So, again, these people are just like us. Even in Acts 1, verse 11, when the ascension is happening, when Jesus is going back to heaven, what does he say? He said, "Men of Galilee, why you stand around gazing up into heaven?" Okay? This Jesus who was taken up to heaven will come again in the same manner. Were they just amazed? I think I would have been. My jaw would have been opened. I would have been amazed at what I was seeing. So I think I'd have been looking up too. But what was the message there? Get about your business. Okay? He's coming back. I think they were amazed in that sense. Or were they still just confused that he was leaving? Again, they're expecting him to stay and rule, right? And he's going back to heaven. I thought it was going to be here. It's amazing to me, again, and it's like I said, hindsight's 20/20. It's easy for us to say, why didn't they get it? Why didn't they understand? But they didn't, all right? They were still struggling with that, even after he appears to them after his death. They're still struggling with this idea of who and what he is and what's coming and what the kingdom's going to be. All right? I put down some ideas from today about how we mistake things or we doubt stuff. There are still people today, even we can take high-powered telescopes and we can look at the moon and we can see the space junk sitting on the moon. We can see the flag that they stuck in the moon, all right? And the what's left of the lunar module, and there's people that still think that's all a hoax, that they really didn't go. That was all fake. They did Hollywood, all right? They don't believe that we've been to the moon. People will be skeptical about all kinds of stuff, won't they? Another thing I'll think of, especially in this room, you know, I remember the first time there was a computer in our classroom at school. There was one. And you had to be in the advanced class to get to touch it. But could we have imagined over the last 40 years or so what those machines have done in our society and in our world, right? And how our world has changed all around us while we were living it, right? But we couldn't really understand that. So the idea of some other type of kingdom that wasn't an earthly kingdom with a king on earth with the army and all that kind of stuff, how unreasonable is it to think that they had a difficult time understanding that concept? Because it had never been before, right? There had never been anything like that. So, again, as you said, we're no different. We're just lucky we've got the scripture and we can read back and see what was going to happen. But when it comes to the future, we're no sharper than they are. We're just guessing as well, right?
Well, when you think about it, though, Mark, we've got the completed scriptures, and today we have people that are associated with, I call it the alphabet soup mix, because there's so many labels, the LBGTQ plus A, whatever. And they'll make a statement that if Jesus were alive today, he would be in favor of what they're doing.
Now, we know that's not true because...
We know it's not true, but with the completed scriptures, people can still be led astray.
So
can you only imagine how people that were striving back then to try to follow and had just a limited amount of text that there actually was? It was mostly spoken word in their day.
Yeah, they're relying on word of mouth mostly from people to people to get the information they needed. So I think it is good that we do have enough information to know what it should look like. All right, we have the answers now. We know where we're headed and what's going to happen. But there's still a lot of things and questions to be asked, isn't there? And so Jesus scolds them a little bit and asks them, did you not understand the prophets? And there's a huge list. I started on my paper here, and I'm on to the next page. I don't think y'all probably want me to rattle them off. But starting all the way back, he says that from Moses forward, right? Well, who wrote Genesis? Moses, all right? Starting in Genesis, all the way forward, from the promise that was made to Eve, all the way through to Malachi, Jesus is prophesied over and over and over again. Multiple times. And there's all these clues to who he would be and what was going to happen to him. And you know, it didn't write it out specifically, but there was pretty clear picture of what they should have expected. And as we talked about earlier in some of these, when we talked about our lesson a couple of weeks ago, how the knowledgeable people of the time missed all the clues because they were looking for the wrong thing. So Jesus is telling them that, and they discuss a lot of that as they're traveling. As they're walking, they're going through all these examples in the scriptures. So they get to the town, and they invite Jesus to stay with them and to break bread with them. And I think this is an interesting part of the story too. They don't recognize him until they break bread with him. And we don't know exactly why that's when their eyes were open. You know, we know it's at dusk. It's about the end of the day. So I think they could probably see the person he was while they were walking. I don't think it was dark. Maybe by the time they get to the town, it probably is. But they go into the house, and suddenly they realize when they break bread, and these were followers of Jesus, so they had saw him do this before, and it says they recognized him by the breaking of bread. So apparently there was something he did there that caused them to realize who he was, and their eyes were open, and they realized they're sitting there with Christ.
There's a tremendous irony there, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
We don't recognize until we break bread with him either.
Yeah. You know, we need to open our eyes besides when we're breaking bread, right? Good point. Excellent point. So they realized who they were speaking with, and then this is the inquisitive person I am. What does it say happens after they recognize who he was?
He left. He's gone.
It says he vanished from their sight. Now, I don't know what that means. I don't know if they closed their eyes and he wasn't there. I don't know if he got up and walked out of the room. We really don't know what that means. But it sounds sort of supernatural, doesn't it? That he just left suddenly once they realized. But his job had been done there, hadn't it? And what do those guys do? What do? They just walked between 6 and 7 miles from Jerusalem to get to Emmaus. What did they do? They got up and walked right back to Jerusalem. All right, so they're putting in 14 miles that day. Were they excited? I'll just ask you, if you just walked 7 miles and somebody said, you forgot something, you got to go back and get that. How excited would you be about going back? I don't think you'd be too excited, right? These guys were excited. They forgot they had just walked that, and they turned around and walked back down there again because they wanted to go tell the apostles. Now, this is how we know these guys must have been pretty close to Jesus or pretty close to the apostles. These were not just random people. These were part of this group of people that followed Jesus all the time, all right? They knew where to find the apostles. They knew where they were at. They knew where they could go locate them and talk to them. So they take off, and they head right back down the same road they had just traveled to go tell them they had saw Jesus. They were believers now, weren't they? All right? They were with it. So they get there. I think it's interesting. When they arrive, they think they've got the news. Now what the lady said makes sense. Now we've seen him, and they walk in the door, and what do they find out? They find out that Peter has already seen him as well, and Peter had told the apostles at that point. He told them, hey, I've seen Jesus, and he's alive. So they know. Then these guys come in and confirm it. The ladies had saw him this morning, and everybody's excited now. They all know this is for real. We think about the apostles again, and they should be. We put them up on a pedestal a little bit because of their faith and everything. But when you read this stuff, you realize they were just people like us, and man, the light bulb has come on, hasn't it? They realize what's going on. This is for real. Even though they followed him and done all the things they had done, now it's another level. The stuff that he did is really, and said he would do, was really happening. Paul writes about Peter's interaction with Jesus in 1 Corinthians 15, 5 through 8. He says, and that he appeared to Cephas, or Peter, then to the 12. Then he appeared to more than 500 brothers at one time, most of whom who are still alive at the time he wrote this, though some have fallen asleep. And then he appeared to James, and then to the apostles, and last of all, as to one untimely born, he appeared also to me on the road to Damascus. All right? That's not in there, but we all know where he appeared to Paul at. So, the appearances of Jesus were to, lend credibility to the story. And he was there for 40 days in and around Jerusalem, appearing to different people. In the book of Mark, we read a condensed version of the same story about Mary Magdalene, how she had saw him. And then we also hear in 2 verses the same story we read a while ago that was very long. In Mark 16, 12 through 13, he says, and after these things he appeared in another form to 2 of them as they were walking in the country. That's the same story we heard a while ago. And they went back and told the rest, but they did not believe them. John chapter 20, verses 19 through 20, talks about the details of when Jesus appears to the apostles as a group. And I believe everybody but Thomas was there at that particular situation. And he talks about, the whole situation there in John. So we get all this information about all the times that Jesus appears after his resurrection. Any questions at this point? Got a couple more things to share with you here. So, Emmaus was one of the original places, or on that road, and then at the town when he ate with them, is one of the early places that Jesus reveals himself to his followers. So, that's the key thing to remember about this location. It's also interesting to remember that Cleophas and his friend were not convinced at first. Remember, they were debating the whole time that they were walking before Jesus showed up. They were sharing all the things that they knew. And I think that's a good example for us. When I think about these 2 followers of Christ, they were doing exactly what we ought to do. We need to search the Scriptures. We need to have spiritual discussions with one another, don't we? And that's what these guys were doing. They wasn't coming to exactly the right conclusions, but they were working on it. They were working through the details, weren't they? What's happening? What's going on around us? There's something significant. Let's talk about it. I think we need to do the same thing sometimes for ourselves. Even if we just have a question about something that's in the Scriptures, it's good for us to sit down and look and follow the pattern of Jesus. What did he do? Let's see what the prophet said. He went to the Scriptures, didn't he? And proved to them what was going on. I think that's a good example for us from this particular lesson here. I like their enthusiasm. Again, what would it be like here if we all had the kind of enthusiasm that Cleophas and his friend had once they realized they had saw Jesus? And we all ran to wherever it is to share what we know with other people. Are we sharing what we know with the people that we come in contact with regularly and doing what these guys did? I would have to say that we could probably all work on that one, couldn't we? All right? So we need to take advantage of those opportunities when they present themselves. These are things that are just concluding thoughts. We talked about their confusion. and how we could understand, and we're not any different than them. I think, we become a little confused sometimes too, and we just got to work through it like him and his buddy did here. What was the purpose of all these appearances? And we'll wrap it up. What was the purposes? Why did Jesus appear to so many people? It said hundreds of them in here in some of the scriptures that we read, and I jumped over some stuff because we was going to run out of time. But what was the purpose?
I think because Jesus wanted them to be his eyewitnesses that he actually arose from the dead.
Yeah, I think that's number one, and he also gave them some instruction and set them up for the next phase. Because right after all this, right after his ascension, then we're looking at Pentecost, and we're looking at the establishment of the church, we're looking at Peter giving the first sermon, we're looking at everything's fixing to hit fast forward, isn't it? And I think during that time, he was also preparing them for that. They needed to see him so that they would have the courage and the strength they needed to do what was fixing to happen next. Because it was fixing to get real for them. They had practiced some while they were traveling with him. He had even sent them out to teach at one point. So they had gotten some practice in, but it was time for the real deal and to get started. And I think all these appearances and the instruction he gave them was prepping them for that, and then giving credibility to his having arisen. Next week, we're going to Jericho. So we'll be looking at that. So look at your Bible and look at the things that happened in Jericho for next week's lesson, and we'll go from there. Appreciate everybody's attention this morning.